Good morning. Welcome back. It's Sarah from Roadworthy. I realized this morning I have not filmed in the park all summer. So here I am. Not the best day in terms of weather, but that's okay because I forgot my sunscreen this morning. So, what's going on this week? Not much. The weather has cooled off. So, I've been sitting outside reading, napping. I don't nap like ever. It's really hard for me to nap. So the fact that I've taken like 2 naps this week, kind of nice. So you thought I would have read more, but I haven't. Okay. What have I read? You know what? Let me start off actually with a DNF. Gun Island by Amitav Ghosh. I don't normally put DNFs on this channel, mostly because I read a couple pages and I realize this book is not for me. And I don't think that's fair to be like, I DNF'd this book, because it's not a book for me. Um, and and then sometimes I DNF a book because I'm like, I'm just not in the mood for this. So I feel like that's not a very interesting DNF. But I do think talking about DNFs is important because I do think it gives you a better sense of me as a reader. So I haven't figured out how to incorporate DNFs in this channel and when. And there is a motorboat. I'm hoping he's not that disruptive. So why did I DNF this book? So let me give you a little history of me and Amitav Ghosh. I read his book, The Glass Palace, probably 20 years ago. So, and I loved it. Now, my children were small. And so my reading taste, what I needed from reading, is very different than what I need now when my children are in their 20s. And so, although I have incredibly strong memories of loving that book, I'm actually not sure that I would love it today. But because of my love of that book, I have been chasing that dream of having another Glass Palace experience with Amitav Ghosh. I picked up The Sea of Poppies years ago, and I gave it 3 stars and decided I didn't need to actually read the rest of the Ibis trilogy. I read 2 years ago, I read The Hungry Tide, which was about sort of this storm and catastrophic flooding in the Sundarbans. Those are these mangrove forests that have created these islands off of the northeast coast of India. So they're along India and Bangladesh, and oh my God, the waves. I forget the joys of filming outdoors in public. um, Anyway, these islands, because they're basically, this is my understanding, are built from basically the roots of mango trees, they're very fragile and fragile to climate change. Um, and, you know, the changing sea level is obviously an issue. So, some places where there were actually islands and villages are now, those villages have been destroyed. Um, with the increase in catastrophic storms, uh, those do more damage. So, these are communities that are very much dying. Um, because of climate change and ecological destruction. So, and I'm going into this whole preamble because Ghana Island takes place in the same region. So, this is a story about Dean, who is a Bengali rare book dealer in Brooklyn, and he comes back to Bengal um, every year to visit family. Um, and while he's there, so he's sort of he had a PhD uh, written about this legend involving the gun merchant. I forget what his name is in Bengali. Um, who offends a goddess, uh, and she comes after him and destroys him and his family, kind of a thing. Um, and so his PhD was written on that, and of course he can't really get a career, so he becomes a rare book dealer. Um, so while he's visiting home, his great aunt, or who's dying, tells him this story that she saw a temple to the gun merchant in the Sundarbans in the 70s. Um, but nobody's ever talked about it. Um, and so this mystery starts on, does this temple still exist? Where is it? And is it really to the gun merchant? Because this would be sort of the first of its kind, the one and only. And why? Um, so this mystery starts. He also, through discussions with his aunt, meets this woman, Pia, who's actually the main character from The Hungry Tide, who, is an immediate love interest. Then, as he's traveling to the Sundarbans, he meets this teenager who's a smuggler, and he sort of learns about, again, because of the economic turmoil that's going on in the region, there's a lot of smuggling because the border with Bangladesh is quite porous, and a lot of human trafficking going on as people are trying to flee the region. Uh, so, so there are all these threads going on, and I DNF'd this book at like 70 pages in. And again, there's all these threads going on. And I found myself not particularly interested in any of them. Dean, to me, I just felt like there wasn't really, he seemed very flat. And I didn't get a lot of character development. And so I wasn't interested in his story. I wasn't really interested in the mystery. Um, does this temple exist? I wasn't interested in the potential love story, and I wasn't. I felt like I read a lot about the Sundarbans and the issues there in the Hungry Tide, so I wasn't particularly interested in that aspect either. So this book just was flat on all levels for me, and so I DNF'd at about 70 pages, and I feel like my relationship with Amitav Ghosh is officially over. Ah, that's that. I read a novella, Saudade, by Suneeta Perez de Costa. This is about a Goan immigrant family in Angola in the 1960s. What? I actually had to do a little Wikipedia. Like, what? Because I thought Goa is in India. What? Well, yes, it is. So, Goa is located in the central west coast of India. It was a Portuguese enclave, sort of like Macau. You know, the Portuguese had these little city colonies around and about, and apparently they had three in India, and Goa was one of them. And Angola was a Portuguese colony, which I did not realize. So, similar to the British having Indians move to Uganda, for example, for various political reasons, the Portuguese had Goans going to Angola. Um, and so so this immigrant family um, is in Angola again in the 60s. So this is that period of time where Angola is going to proclaim its independence. And this is told from um, a child's perspective. So in this little novella, we get her from, I don't know, she's maybe 6, 7 years old at the beginning, and it ends with, excuse me, her being a teenager um, when Angolan independence arrives. Um, Now, it's sort of like a slice of life vignettes. You see maybe scenes from school, scenes with a neighbor, um, overheard conversations between her parents, um, observing conversations between her mother and the housekeeper. And so that's how you get a sense of what is going on, both the racism in this family, but also what's happening in a larger political context, because maybe she'll hear her parents talk about unrest or, whatever. It's an interesting perspective, but I'm not sure it really worked in the sense that you she maybe relates this conversation that she overheard, but you never get her response to it. So although you as the reader can tell um, that there's racism, that uh, you piece together her father is a labor lawyer, essentially oppressing the native Angolans, um, and you can see the increasing anxiety in her parents, but again you never get her response to it. So all these events feel very, very removed. um, And so, although you see from this very distant place, maybe her parents' increasing anxiety, you never get a sense of the narrator's anxiety and how she feels. Um, I so I feel like the author's choices in how to tell this story just didn't pull me in. It didn't work for me. Um, this is was an interesting. So it sort of ends um, with her uh, going back to um, Goa to escape the unrest, and of course she's very upset about leaving everything she knows and going to Goa where she's never been and she doesn't know anybody. Um, so it was interesting thinking about this book in comparison to Claire Massoud's um, Strange and Eventful History, because both of those books deal with sort of the loss of country. Um, in the Massoud book, it's her French family being kicked out of Algeria. In this, you have a similar situation, this family leaving Angola. And the reality is, that was hard for these particular families. It's interesting because Jenny from Reading Envy and her review of Saudade, um, in Goodreads makes a comment like she was sick of reading books about colonizers being displaced from their homes when those shouldn't have been their homes in the first place. I kind of get that perspective, yeah, but the reality is again, for this narrator, this teenage girl, this is the only home she's ever had, and it's lost. Um, like that's also the reality. Yes, you can argue she shouldn't have been there, but that doesn't matter to her when she's leaving a boy, she's leaving her neighbors and her school and her family, right? She is not, she's just as much of a victim here, and or she's a victim, to the changes in history. Um, anyway, you can tell I've been thinking a lot about this. Is what happens? Um, when there's tremendous political economic upheaval. Um, there's winners and losers, and in a lot of ways, everybody's a loser. Anyway, it's interesting read to have read at the time that I read it. Again, you know, again, I also think of A History of Burning, about it, an Indian family being booted out of Uganda. Um, anyway, just interesting to think about this perspective as well. I will say this writing is beautiful. I mean, on a sentence by sentence level. I wasn't sure I was going to make it through because it is one of those books with no paragraph breaks, which I don't like. I really don't like. But I think because it was a novella and some of the writing is so beautiful that I could make it through. So I think I gave it 3 stars. Funny, I finished this at the beginning of the week, and I have to say, a lot of this has faded from my memory. So it's definitely not going to be a book that sticks with me. Last book, The Wolf Children by K. Rademacher. This is a historical mystery. This is the second in the Inspector Staff series. Um, this takes place in 1947 Hamburg. Um, I did read the first book in the series, A Murder in Ruins. Yeah, which I really liked. And so I've wanted to read this one for a long time. There is a third book in the series, but my library doesn't have it. And I'm not going to go out of my way to look for it just because I feel like there's a lot of historical mysteries and I'm not that, like, I just don't get attached to a series. Um, anyway, ramble. What is this book? Like, get back to the book. Um, so this is about so the reality in 1947 Hamburg was, I flagged this and I have to look. There were between 10 and 12,000 children living in the ruins of Hamburg after the war. Kids of 10, 12, or 14 years of age who'd been the only ones in their families to survive the bombings or the long trek west from their homes in the east. So, kids fleeing the Russians. What I really enjoyed about this series was the descriptions in Germany in the immediate aftermath of the war. The poverty, the rationing, um, the dirt, the ersatz coffee, the smuggling. What's interesting is, good people doing unethical things in order to survive. I find that really fascinating, and I find it fascinating to think about what would I do, right, in these situations. Um, so for example, his girlfriend Anna, his wife died in the war, and he's seeing this woman. She is surviving by, she goes into the rubble in these bombed out buildings looking for art, paintings, porcelain, Meissen porcelain, whatever, watches, whatever, restores them and then sells them on the black market or tries to sell them to the British occupiers or the Americans. Um, and that's how she's surviving. Uh, so so I just find the time period and the place super interesting. And I think that's what I've enjoyed about this series. The murder is one of these children who's an orphan, um, ends up murdered, stabbed. His body is on a undetonated explosive in a warehouse on the grounds of the factory, the shipyard. I can't remember its name, but this is the shipyard where the vast majority of U-boats were constructed. That's sort of the murder. And so, obviously through the course of investigating this murder, you learn a little bit about the wolf children, these orphans, and how they were surviving. Anyway, so the murder itself, and who did it and why, none of that is particularly, I think, compelling. At least not for me. I mean, again, for me, it's the time period, the moral ambiguity of living in Germany at that time that is really the draw to these books. That is what I've read. What am I reading? Still reading Anne Appelbaum's Red Famine. This is going to take a while because it's kind of dense nonfiction. No One Dies Yet by Kobby Ben Ben. Love the cover. This is about Americans, African Americans going to visit Ghana in 2019. Again, cover. And I am listening to Briefly, very beautiful. I'm looking around because I'm like, do I have the author's name written down anywhere? No, I don't. That's what I'm listening to in audio. It is a dystopian novel, and it is distressing. I'm almost done, so I will talk about that next week. But it's a good one. So stay tuned. All right, I'm going to sign off here because I see a bunch of people walking around, and the waves are picking up. So I'm going to get out of this park, and actually I'm going to go pick some blackberries. Yeah, so hope you're having a good reading week, and catch you next week. All right, bye.